welcome everyone to Reach Society's Ask Your Experts. So this, if I rightly remember, is our 5th episode in which we come together and we have an expert panel that are analysing important issues that impact on the modern Black community. So today's topic, and it's a really important and interesting topic, so I'm really looking forward to hearing the views of our 5 experts. So the topic for this session is who is responsible for the destiny of the modern Black community in the United Kingdom? Wow, it's I'm really looking forward to it. And we've got, to help us answer this important question, we've got 5 individuals. We've got Revd Dr Joe Aldred, and Joe is a trustee and volunteer at the NCLF, and he can perhaps tell us what that is. He's a Black Christian voice and a member of the Windrush Cross-Government Working Group and a fellow at Roehampton University. Our next panelist is Clarke, CEO of RAFFA, International Development Agency, psychologist and physiotherapist with over 30 years experience in the adult healthcare sector and trauma support. Then we've got Michelle Johnson, as more than 10 years in the NHS as a nurse. She's a researcher, EDI leader. She's also a mental health advocate, radio broadcaster, life coach, and author. I know she's got a recent book out, so we might get to hear a bit about that. We've then got Dr. Dwain Neil OBE. He's the chairman of Reach Society, entrepreneur and author. And I know he's also got a recent book that's been published. And then we've got Paul Riddell. He's the equality consultant, been doing that for a number of years. And he's also the deputy chairman of the Enfield Caribbean Association. And they are doing some fantastic work in the community. And as we're talking about the community, I'd like to get Paul, if he could, just give us an overview of this important question, and particularly to ask the question about, and if you can give us an overview, Paul, of the contribution of the community groups to the future or destiny of the modern Black community. What are your thoughts, Paul?
Okay, thanks, Donald. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Fine.
Yeah, thanks very much, Donald. So as you said, I'm currently the vice chair of Enfield Caribbean Association, otherwise known as the ECA. So I'm going to talk briefly about what I think community groups are doing and whether or not they're taking responsible for, as you said, the modern Black community. But just briefly, the organization, the ECA, is a small charity which was founded about 30 years ago. And the aim is to promote the interest, well-being and quality of life of the residents of Enfield, but in particular, those of Caribbean descent. So we provide a kind of range of services to the community, to the Black community and to the community in general, including like regular exercise classes, luncheon club. We do careers events at local primary and secondary school, normally using successful Black people. Reach has helped us in a number of those, I think in actually all of them. And we also have a dialogue with all the 3 local MPs, and we're members of the Police Community Engagement Steering Group and also the Stop and Search Monitoring Group, because we have a lot of problems in Edmonton. In addition, we also have an annual Windrush event and Black History event every year to celebrate the contributions of Black people have made to the economic and cultural life of the UK. So we do quite a bit. There's more, but I might expand on it later. However, in order to kind of appreciate and understand how community groups influence and interact with the modern Black community, we need to acknowledge that there are many community groups and charities like ours involving community activities dedicated to working for the Black community. And I'll kind of just give you some examples, which we might want to add to, but there are obviously health groups, mental health groups, health networks, and you have organizations like, I think I saw them on the TV the other day, the Sickle Cell Society. We have those involved with education matters, for example, Black supplementary schools, which I'll probably mention shortly. You also have organizations of local community of identity. You know, those are the kind of organizations like self-groups that are set up to help certain groups, ethnic groups, nationalities, or religion. There's quite a few in Enfield, actually. You have sports and social clubs, social inclusion, deals with social inclusion like luncheon clubs. We have food poverty groups, legal and immigration support, youth violence, particularly dealing with knife crime. We have campaign and community mediation groups. And for us locally, and I'm not sure this is probably reflected in the rest of the country, but during COVID, we also had a number of groups that we worked with that were set up temporarily to provide food to the Black community, particularly to the elderly Black community, which were people living by themselves. And I suppose if you really wanted to extend it, Donald, you could also include Black churches and, of course, our so-called community leaders. So there are others, of course, and this is just a snapshot, but there are many other groups that are doing work in the Black community. Some of those, as you know, of course, have received national acclaim and recognition for the work they do in the Black community. You know, Reach has benefited from that themselves. So, I mean, kind of given the range of community groups, the question is, are they contributing to shaping the destiny of the Black community? My answer to the question is yes, of course they are. For example, to give you one example, if you look at Black supplementary schools, we all know they were set up, the groups were set up in the 1960s for the Black community when faced with a national education system which was racist and labeled many of our children as being educationally subnormal. We touched on this briefly in our discussion about the Qualification Society when people like Sir Jeff told us about some of his experience when he was told he was educationally subnormal. And many of those groups still exist. In fact, we're having a Black History Month event on Saturday, the 16th of October, and there'll be a supplementary school there called, let me get this right, Eastside Young Leaders Academy. And you may have heard of them. They've been so successful that they're in the process of setting up 2 other Saturday schools. So that's just an example of some of the work that people are doing. However, I don't believe personally that we are doing enough to help the Black community, to shape the destiny of the modern Black community. And that's after 10 years of being a member of the ECA. There's much, much more that we need to do. And I think this is the challenge that we have going forward in what in reality is become often a fairly hostile and ever increasing diverse and complex society that we're now in. So therefore, we'll have to be, my view, just to close, Donald, I think we're going to have to be open, honest. We have to be creative and even challenging when we discuss how we can build on the successes of the Black community groups and what more they can do to shape the destiny of the modern Black community. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Paul. You really set the scene nicely, where you talked about different community groups and potential challenges. So I'd like to ask each of our experts that very same question. And let me again remind our expert what the first question is. And we've got a series of questions about, you know, the destiny of the modern Black community. So do you believe that community groups are addressing the matter of the destiny of the modern Black community? So Reverend Joe, I'll come to you first to get your thoughts on that question. And again, thank you for coming this evening.
It's a great pleasure. I don't feel I'm making any more of a sacrifice than anybody else, of course, on this platform tonight. But I'm glad to be here. The answer, I suppose, is never just a matter of yes or no. You know, answers are nearly always more complex than that and are somewhere in the middle. I would say, you know, to the question of our community groups making a contribution to shaping that destiny. I would say inadvertently, inadvertently, but not necessarily intentionally. And I can speak more so from the position of the churches that Paul had very much on the edge of his hemisphere when he spoke a while ago. If you really want to push the boat out, you include the churches. For me, it's very much at the epicenter, certainly, of my own life and consciousness. And those churches, let me call them the Black Pentecostal churches and the wider Black Christian community in the UK, I think have, by our actions over the last 20, 25 years and more, been shaping something, but it's not intentional enough. I think that's what I would say. Recently, I and others became exercised by this idea of our destiny as a Black community, a modern Black community, Reach Society calls it. And we have been talking about this, and we came up with this idea that we should build something called Vision 2030. I was going for Vision 2050, to be honest, because I felt that rather than flapping around with other people telling us what our present and our future and our destiny is, that we should set about looking at ourselves, setting targets for ourselves to say that by 2030 or 40 or 50, what percentage of the legal profession should the modern Black community be? What percentage of judges should we be? What percentage of, you can go right across the sectors. And I think we ought to consciously look at ourselves, set some targets for the future that really does feed into the question of destiny. So, that's a roundabout way of saying that I think, yes, we have, by some good actions, some good pieces of work, particularly within the churches, we built some good people, we put up some good structures. Those will speak to destiny, but unless you actively sit down and say, right, where are we? Where do we want to go? Then I'm afraid you're not going to build the kind of craft that is likely to land you there.
Thank you, Joe. And you've made already some valuable contributions. And it's quite interesting. You mentioned Vision 2030. And what you're somehow doing is identifying what are our needs. And by identifying our needs, we can strategically think, about the future. So, Angela, what's your thoughts? You, CEO of RAFFA, involved in, community work. How do you think our community is shaping the destiny of the modern Black community?
First of all, I'd like to thank you, Donald, for obviously the opportunity to basically be here again on our fifth Ask Our Experts. Yeah. And as I say, I feel that even doing this is somehow helping to shape our community. But I concur, I think, with what Joe said with regards to the fact that it isn't strictly yes or no. There is a lot of work that is being done. There are a lot of organizations, a lot of community organizations out there. Whether their vision is to shape the destiny of the Black community, I think is questionable. I think there are a lot of community organizations out there who have a purpose, who are looking at their individual issues and doing that for what's happening right now. If you ask, is that going to shape the future? Yes, of course it's going to shape the future. What we do now, the voices that are raised now, the actions that we take now, is going to have an impact on our future. But it doesn't take away from the fact that there is still not that mapping exercise that has happened as to, how many, what are they doing, the duplication, triplication of, and the lack of kind of coming together. And I suppose that's what's the gray area when you say, well, are they looking at the destiny of the Black community? As I say, right now, we're dealing with discrimination, we're dealing with issues. You see, there are community groups who are talking about, race and all sorts of issues. And yes, those things will actually shape our destiny or have an impact and influence on our destiny. But there are a whole host of other Black community groups with different emphases, different approaches. And so, yes, that will shape our destiny. So I suppose, yes, I agree. But yes, there are also many people out there doing many different things, and the vision and the focus is what's important.
Oh no, thank you, Angela. The legendary Michelle, what's your thoughts as someone who's doing great work in our community?
Okay, so thanks everyone. Thanks very much to the Reach Society and the team of leaders there for the invitation to participate in this conversation tonight. I would say that I might give a little bit more credit really to the community groups than what I've been hearing so far. And my experience of them has evolved over the years from being very, very involved in church life, and many churches are voluntary sector, are voluntary charities that are registered, and doing a range of social type outreach to their local communities. And but also in my role within the NHS in the last 10 years in particular, when I moved into commissioning, I have come into, especially as the head of communications and engagement, in fact, stakeholder engagement, that has really given me a bridge into community and community groups and voluntary sector, the third sector organizations. And I have to say that it's always been, in my view, breathtaking. I'm always in awe of a lot of these community groups because they are filling gaps that our statutory services in terms of need are not necessarily always able to provide. So I do want to give them some credit and acknowledge the work that they're doing. And I would say that to some extent, a good extent, yes, it's not perfect. Yes, it's not meeting every need, but to a good extent, as an outsider, because I don't work in the voluntary sector, but I work with them, alongside them, I would say they're doing a good job. And in terms of supporting people, because in terms of destiny, so it might not be as many as Angela has said, or Joe earlier has said, that they have a specific vision around the destiny, but what they're doing is supporting people in the different facets and dimensions of life to fulfill that potential as far as possible. And Donald, you mentioned something about something about need and identifying need. And I think our community groups are very good at identifying need, because in fact, that's the basis upon which they exist. That's the basis upon which they have been created. So community groups, voluntary sector organizations have come into being because somebody saw a need that wasn't addressed by statutory services or otherwise, and felt that, as an activist or community organizer, I want to do something about it. And then a community group started up and grew, or a voluntary sector started up and grew. So they exist to address need, and I think they're doing the best that they can, really. And so the other thing that I think Paul mentioned in his opening remarks, which I've kind of jotted down here, the list of different voluntary sectors who are addressing specific types of need, whether it's in health, and for very vulnerable people. So for example, am I okay to name some of them? Black Cancer Care, for example. Treasures Foundation is a charity set up to help ex-offending women coming out of prison, so they don't have to return to the dire circumstances that led to crime, and build them back up so that they can become productive citizens. In fact, so rescuing their destiny, in fact, and turning it around completely. And somebody mentioned the Sickle Cell Society. So again, it's health. So there's lots and lots doing health, not just health in terms of physical health, but also mental health. So we've got Black Mind, among others, addressing those issues. We've got Jason Roberts Foundation, who's doing sport. We've got lots of educational community groups and the like. I suppose where we might need to focus a bit more effort is around finances and and sort of teaching people financial literacy. But beyond that, I would say that our community groups and our voluntary sector are really doing, hard work in terms of supporting the Black community outside of what statutory services offer. And I say, kudos to them, really, hats off to them.
No, thank you, Michelle. And you've made a really good point. And the questions we always pose are there to reflect in a way. And you're absolutely right. Many community groups have been set up to identify the needs for our community and are doing fantastic work. So maybe it is, the question is, should it be the community groups that should be shaping? So Dwain, listening to what's been said, what's your perspective about community groups? I mean, should that be their role?
Thanks, Donald, for the opportunity to comment on, the contribution or impact of the community groups. I have a very sharp view on this, and that sharp view is demonstrated by looking at what the Windrush generation did in those early years, between the late 40s and right through to the mid 70s. The pioneering work by that whole generation transformed the legal system in this country from one whereby the colour bar was normal and it was allowable in Britain. And now we have a set of race relations legislation as a result of the pioneering work of folks in that generation, which has created a different climate for people like us in the UK. So there is an example of need, and there is an example of response, which has actually created an improved platform. So I'm agreeing with what almost everyone has said. There are examples where they are shaping, but more as a reaction rather than a longer term thing. And that's where I have an issue with community groups. Because it's more accidental or reactive, I cannot say that community groups have a long game in mind, and with that in mind, they are doing certain things purposefully to get there. So here is my big example, and the example of biggest disappointment to me in our community. Almost from the get-go, Black children have been abused in our schools. Everybody knows it. And yet 70 odd years of living in the United Kingdom, that abuse is continuing unabated. If we had a long game about protecting our children and ensuring they get best education, we should have some tangible improvements now. We don't have that long game around education. And so overall, I'm saying, no, community groups are not purposefully shaping the destiny of our community. By accident, we have examples of where that's happened, maybe in health, maybe in politics. But by design, I need a lot more convincing. That's it.
Thank you, Dwain. Hard hitting as ever and challenging. I'd like to hear the response. But I guess the question is, and well, Paul, I wonder if you started the discussion about community groups. Now, having heard our experts, and you being one of them, what's your summary on what you've heard so far?
Well, I mean, I'm like Dwain. I agree with more or less everything that people have said. And I started with an apology to the good Reverend, because I didn't mean to exclude churches. It's just that they don't always necessarily fit into the definition of community groups. So that's why I said it in that way. So apologies. I mean, I don't want to repeat anything that anybody has said, but to me, I kind of look at it like, because I do a lot of equality and diversity work as a consultant, and Michelle knows this probably more than I do. One of the things that you always say to organizations, they call us in to do a lot of audits. It's a diagnostic. It's where we start off, isn't it? Because what they want to do when you do that diagnostic is that they want to develop a strategic approach to developing and implementing their equality, diversity, and inclusion policy. And I think that's where I agree with Dwain, that this is my real problem. On one hand, I think that they're doing some fantastic group, because I'm a member of a community group ourselves, and a lot of people, we put a lot of time into it. But there is a failure to think strategically, one, and there is a failure to kind of work collaboratively. This is for me. So there are three issues that I think we need to address. What's happening strategically, not by accident, strategically that works, and how can we build from that? Secondly, where are we making a difference that we can learn from across our groups, and how can we utilize it in other groups? And for me, the other thing is that where are the biggest gaps and challenges that exist for us as a community? Because I think that we need to identify what they are. So I kind of try, sorry I've been a bit boring, to look at it in a strategic way, because it's something I've learned through my work, that that's what it is that we don't do enough of. We are reactive, not proactive. And I think that's one of the things that we could change.
Paul, that's interesting. I mean, I see what you were saying, and I'm very much listening and inclined to see Michelle's perspective, because it was almost these community groups were set up more as a response to, you know, systemic racism. So we look at the supplementary school, etc. I guess now we're, you know, third, fourth generation from Windrush, as Dwain's talking. You mentioned a really good point now, is perhaps now at this moment in time, we can start to think strategically, or we can do, maybe dare I say, like a gap analysis. Because I recall growing up in the 60s, there was still that mantra that we're not here to stay long. We're just only temporarily. And I wonder whether or not that temporary mindset has been, you know, one of the reasons we've not done this. But what about, dare I say, our elites? Maybe, as Michelle, community groups are there to, you know, respond to the needs of the community. And I think absolutely they've done a marvelous job. But do you believe that and I hate the term black elites, I'm trying to think of another term, maybe our black leaders, can, you know, are they addressing, or can they address the destiny of the modern black community? What I mean by elites, let me expand on that. That might be our business leaders, our community leaders, our elected representative. I mean, look at the guys that are on the power list. They are viewed as some fantastic individuals that are doing great work. Maybe they could be part of this gap analysis. I don't know. Do you think they are addressing the destiny? I'll give you one example, is someone like Lewis Hamilton, who's recently said, look, I'm going to try and do more in education, for example. So Joe, what do you say to that question? I'll ask you first.
Loads of things I want to say as you're speaking. You know, just because a dog bites you doesn't mean that you are an expert on dog biting, you know. And I think some of the stuff which have happened around people picking up things have come about because of their experience. And so, you know, something happens to your family, you launch something. But I'm just a little bit further on in my thinking than accepting that it's okay because everybody's trying hard. You know, I would not desist at all from the view that many of our people work very hard and sacrifice a whole lot in our community, and that have benefited the community over the years and until today. But, you know, Animal Farm comes to mind, and Boxer. Boxer's response to everything was must work harder, must work harder. Well, sometimes you need to work smarter, not harder. And so I'm just not in it for the hard work. I go back to Jamaica, I see some people in the country place where I come from, you know, making bricks with straw. They're working hard, but how far is that getting us? It is debatable. I tend to take the view that, stars, going back to my very first analogy here, stars are not necessarily the people to direct the community. So just because you can drive a car fast doesn't mean that you are going to build community, okay? It doesn't mean you can't either, but I'm just saying being an expert at that doesn't make you qualified for the other. I'm of the view that what we don't have sufficiently are competing ideologies. At the moment, for example, what I might call the political left has the hegemony in the public square. So there is not a competing voice from the right. That would mean that there is some competition of ideologies. So if you don't believe in, I don't know, the left's version of socialism, then of course you're damned, because that means you believe in capitalism, and capitalism is partly bad for us. But really what we see are a number of our people, talking the socialist talk, but actually living the capitalist life. And that kind of hypocrisy is all around us. I think what we need is to open up the space for ideas. And those ideas can come from anywhere. They can come from the elite driver like Lewis Hamilton, or they can come from a school teacher, or they can come from somebody who is unemployed. We need that competition of thought. I don't think we even accept that there is, universally among us, that there is a modern Black community. I don't know if we even have consensus that that thing exists, let alone to agree that we need some kind of a vision of our destiny. Some people have long given into the idea that what we need, is a blancmange society where, your distinctions are rubbed out and we just all meet in the middle. I don't think that's good. That kind of running a race but nobody wins, I don't think is good for us. So I think what we need is to open up for some real contra ideas about who are we, where are we going, and when we contest that. And just finally, my example, is I'm a Christian minister, of course, as you know. I do a bit of theology. In the Old Testament, there's a prophet called Jeremiah. He's very often called the weeping prophet, who is crying over the state of Israel. But he had a contention with fellow prophets who were taken away, some of them, into captivity in Babylon. Right? And some of the prophets were saying to the people in Babylon, don't worry, your stay here isn't going to be long, right? Just don't even bother to put down your bag, just like the grip generation from our, the first generation, take a grip, my brother, and all that. You don't have to worry, because you're going back in 5 years, okay? Jeremiah, though, took them on and said, what I think I see and what I think I hear from God is that your stay in Babylon is going to be 70 years. It's going to be a multi-generational stay. Therefore, settle down, build houses, plant your fields and eat from them, build your families, etc., etc., etc. So somebody has to have a sense of our identity, of who we are, and a sense of our destiny as to what we think we need to build. And finally, in this space, part of that has to be an ongoing understanding of how we don't keep on being surprised by racism, something that has been going on for 500 years, and actually factor it into our plans for the present and for the future. So a competition of ideas is what I would like to see about who we are and where we are going.
Donald, can I come in on the back of what Joe's just said?
Oh, okay. I was...
Because Joe has pointed the way using the biblical example, and I take no issue with that, because basically that's a statement of strategic thinking. And, if people misinterpret that, then that's probably why they're not doing enough. But that, for me, Jeremiah quotation is a statement of strategic thinking. But your question is, are the elite shaping our destiny? And it's a good question, because I admire the work that Lewis Hamilton is doing as an individual. Mission 44 is a generous act of charity, using his own money to try and make a difference. And Lewis Hamilton has joined a small group of others in the elite who are doing worthwhile things. And I've written down here Sakena Lisa, who was funded a charity for the homeless, and he does a lot of other things. The Black Heart Foundation, which gives scholarship and mentoring to a lot of people within the community, both black and white. I've also got the Cowrie Scholarship Foundation, and they're making it possible for talented youngsters from the Black community to take up places in high-value universities and not worry about money because they gain financial support through them. I've also got Stormzy, who from his perch is offering money for scholarship for talented Black youngsters from poor backgrounds to study in high-value universities. And of course, we've got the House of Lords and the MPs drawn from the Black community. So all of those for me are examples of elites who are doing worthy things. But I would say individually and collectively, they are not driven by a vision to say, this is going to shape a Black community that is going to be in a far better place than where it is now. So it's philanthropy that I see from some of the elites and nothing more. So I respect it and I accept it for what it is, but it doesn't amount to a strategic mindset for getting us from where we are to a better place. That's my take.
Thank you, Dwain. Thank you. So, Angela, what's your take on this? You know, I mean, should the elite? I mean, I guess the question is, what do we mean by elite as well? I just use the example of the powerless because I was trying to work this out. I mean, they're individuals. Should they be asked to?
And these are individuals with a lot of money.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
and is that how we are judging? You know, is that how we are judging the worth of the contribution to the community? I want to go back to something that Michelle said, because I just don't want to be don't want you to think that when I spoke, what I was saying was not actually valuing the worth of the community groups, because there are many, and I liken it to what's happened with regards to what we're hearing about the drivers and the Brexit situation. If all the people in the Black communities who have the community group stop working and down tools, what would happen to the infrastructure? And it's good to talk about our elite and what they can provide and all of that. But the reality is that there is a lot of work that is being done, and yes, a lot of the holding together by the community group. So yes, the mental health, yes, the discrimination issues, yes, all of those issues are being bolstered, or the infrastructure is being lifted almost by that. And that isn't necessarily about those that are elite. So the talk about the elite, yes, there are some people doing some fantastic things because they can, because they have the money to do so. But those of the community groups who don't have much are still doing some fantastic and great things. So I wouldn't want it to be just measured on the fact that, yes, Lewis Hamilton, Marcus Rashford, all of these people, they're doing some fantastic things. But if they were Angela Clarke and Michelle Johnson, would anybody bat an eyelid? Would it be out there?
We do, because we love you, Angela. We love you, Michelle. we do that.
But but the thing is that what Dwain said is right. It's about sustainability. It's about, it isn't a one-hit wonder. It is how we create sustainability, how we look at our future, not just for this generation, but for future generations. And it is about creating sustainability. It is about knowledge transfer. It is about education and all of those things. Yeah. And yes, people in the influential positions of Parliament and other places, yes, they get the kudos, they get the attention. But as Joe said, it is going to take maybe a school teacher who's in education, who is seeing what is happening and seeing the injustices and has a strategy for change, because that's what we need. We need strategies for change. And then that is what paves the way for our destiny.
Yeah. Michelle, what's your thoughts? As I said, it may not be elite, but is it the case? Because yeah, they got money, but it's also about influence. And I want us to reflect on this all, because in a way, there may be examples that are already out there. I want us to think of in America, where there's the Black Caucus, because they come together. And if you may or may not know who the Black Caucus are, a group of Black politicians, for example, who try and think strategically for the community, for example. So, Michelle, can elites help?
So you were wondering earlier on who the elites are, and I thought to say, well, Donald, you and Dwain and the Trinity, the Trinity in Reach Society, with all the initials following their names these days. Okay, so in terms of elite, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
I think it looks frozen where I am. Okay. For me, you know, it's the more the merrier. Okay, we're not in a position to be refusing any input to build and support our community or individuals within our community. And wherever and however that's coming in that direction, to me, it is useful and we should welcome it. But you know, when you're talking about guys like Lewis Hamilton and others, a lot of the times, you know, they've come from experiences themselves, and now that they have made it, as it were, what they want to do is give back, and there's nothing wrong with that. The other thing I want to say is that most times, you know, you've got people like not just Black elites, but white elites, Angelina Jolie and all these other people. They all work in charity, and what that does, it's not that they're doing the work themselves, but what they do have is the influence, and they actually are able to attract and draw the kind of attention to an issue that Mrs. Williams down the road might not be able to, even though she's galvanizing a community group. So that's why I say, from all directions, anything supporting or pushing forward the agenda of the Black community, the growth of the Black community or Black individuals, to me is an okay thing. And so I wouldn't discount the elites, as we call them. They're bringing the funding, they're bringing attracting the sort of attention to the particular issue. And that's all they're really doing. They're sort of figureheads, yeah? So they're attracting experts to work in the particular field as well. So I don't have an issue with it. A lot of my experiences in Brent, and you know, Brent is one of the poorest boroughs in the country. There's a proliferation of community groups in Brent. We also have a few iconic figures living and moving about in Brent as well, getting involved in all sorts of things. And when you start to look at the level of need out there, it's just difficult to undermine or discount any input from Black elite to Black Joe Blogs on the street, to be frank. So I'm sorry if it appears simplistic, but I think let's all get involved, all hands on deck as far as I'm concerned.
No, entirely, all hands on deck. And the question, you raise a really good point, and that we come back to that point, Michelle, because when we talk about all hands on deck, is the community doing enough to shape its own destiny?
And that's a good question, Donald, if you don't mind, because I forgot that point I was going to make. The question is it really, anyway, community groups that are supposed to be shaping the destiny? You know what I mean? Community groups are shaping the destiny, and people are saying that they are just reactive, but Reach Society is reactive. It came about as a reaction to some issues. So there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. It's not, I wouldn't say it was accidental either. I think that is to undermine the work that's being done by calling it accidental. It's deliberate. It's a deliberate reaction. It's a deliberate response to a need. Yeah. It's not an accidental response. And yes, I'm open, and definitely we need to be more proactive. We need to be more long-term, having a long-term view. We need to look at sustainability and to support these community groups. Sustainability, we're talking about issues around funding. We're talking about issues around board appointments for trustees. They're all scampering around, always looking for able trustees. So we need to support the community groups that are there. We need to support and gather around the elites as well when they're flying their little flag or big flag, as it were, yeah? There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion.
Paul, your point is not necessarily the elite, and I guess, as I said, I came up with that, but it's, I mean, I guess a bigger question, which will bring out a whole host of things, is the leaders, Black leaders. That's I know that will cause all sorts of contention.
Yeah, that will cause all sorts of problems.
So maybe I just use the word.
I've had a lot of experience in dealing with so-called community leaders. It's not always very good.
Yeah.
Because they can be quite self-serving. So it's something that I think that we need to be careful of.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'd agree with Michelle and Angela, you know, the more the merrier, if they can help. I mean, I've been quite fortunate to meet lots of individuals through my work in different groups. And I wouldn't call them elite, but people with influence in some of the groups do a lot to help members of their own community.
Yeah,
I remembered going to the first time I got trained in how to do impact assessment. Sorry, unconscious bias training, and it was being done. I won't mention the ethnicity, but the person said, I'll be honest, I'm a member of this group. If people of my group get in positions of power, we make it our business to help people like us. And it wasn't a Black person. So I think that is, they do have a role to play, because I think, as somebody said, they can have tremendous influence. If we see what Marcus Rashford has done in terms of the influence that he's actually had, then I think that, yes, I don't like the word elites. I prefer.
Yeah, I was trying to.
I know, but I mean, I like the concept of community much more.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go to Joe's argument, because I think that we do have some tensions in our community that we need to deal with. And some of those tensions are about, as you rightly say, we're not one homogenous group. So you have a situation where there are tensions, you know, because we're a very diverse group. We're, as I said when I spoke earlier on, we're becoming increasingly diverse, and I think more fragmented. I could be wrong, so, you know, people, but that's how it feels, having been around race equality for 40 years, 40 plus years I've been around race equality.
Yeah.
You know, we have a multiple array of identities and cultures within a diverse community, which we have to try and understand. And this is where I agree and create what Angela says. We need to create, I believe, a more unified consciousness about what being Black means in the UK context, and an agreement on how we work collaboratively to improve our lives. That's what we need to think of. We need to find a way to put aside whatever differences we have and recognize what it is that we have in common and come to sort of an agreement about how we can deal with those pressing issues. Now, of course, the elites are going to be part of that, because they can often take the lead and provide strategies and direction and even inspire people. Yeah. But I wouldn't overplay their role. I think that I agree with Michelle that I love the concept of community. When I gave up work, I gave up work to work in the community. I gave up working full time. It was what I always wanted to do, because after nearly 30 years working at a national level, I started to feel that a lot of the solutions to our problems was to be solved at a local level. Yeah. So that was why I want, one of the major reasons why I wanted to make the shifts. But just to repeat, I think there are a lot of tensions that we need to discuss and get rid of in order that we can actually move forward.
It's basically what you said is almost a case. What's needed in our community is maybe, which is almost, it would be amazing if this was possible, is for us all to sit down, the 3 million of us, to decide on 1 or 2 issues. Yeah. And there are several that affect us, but what collectively can we do? But one idea to think about this, do we think government, maybe this is one area we may all agree on, I don't know. Do we think government is addressing the destiny of the modern Black community?
God help us if they start doing that.
Because that might get people thinking, you know.
I hope not. That, you know, we might get into eugenics then. I don't think we want to go there, do we? No, I think government has a role to play. You know, government has a role to play to ensure that all of its citizens are safe and protected, and that opportunities are there for all. So, you know, the legal system and getting things like stop and search, better balance. If you must do it, then show that it is being done equitably and so forth. So the government, and of course that will shift depending on the nature of government and so on as time goes by. But I, you know, I'm interested. I wanted to share with you, if I may, something of my own experience growing up in this country since I was 15 and coming under the influence of significant church leaders. The two or three who meant most to me as mentors could just barely sign their name. They certainly didn't get any certificates for school, let alone university. The woman who's had the biggest impact on my life, my mother, you know, we are to write all of her letters. So what I'm getting at here is that there has been a leadership role that has been played in different sectors, in my case, where I know well, within the church sector, by people who had a sense of the need for well-being, the need for well-being, the need to value yourself. It was very rooted, in my case, in a faith context, in a belief in a God who, you know, picks you up out of the dirt and make you stand up on your feet, right? So there's always been that sense. But I've watched some of these guys who, some of them now deceased. They weren't macro politically astute, but they were micro politically astute. And you saw some evidence of what could be when you look, for example, something that I know that Angela will know well, at the Nehemiah Housing Association, for example, which across the Midlands provide housing for single parents, older people, and so forth. Two of my siblings now live in accommodation provided by Nehemiah. Well, the whole enterprise, and I don't know how many hundreds, thousands of people they house in their various projects, the whole enterprise was started by people who had a sense that we want, particularly for old people, dignity in old age for our people. And they set about building something. So my worry about the mix we have at the moment, and whilst I agree with everybody that the stars also have their role to play, the elites, such as we call them, have their roles to play. What I don't want is for them to have too much of a say in the direction of the community, because I don't think that that is a right and proper influence over where the community might go. So I want to mix. What I would love to see would be the emergence of 2 or 3 think tanks in the modern Black community that would compete with ideas, right? Left, right, middle, compete for ideas about who are we, what are we, where are we going? That's what I like, where they can bring different players into that conversation and not just be led, as I feel we are being led at the moment, disproportionately by people who happen to be, sometimes by their best endeavors, work hard, and they become top of their game. And I absolutely applaud them for that. And that's a great example for us all. But that does not, in my view, qualify you to be the leader of the pack.
Thank you.
Joe, I'd like to come in after Joe.
Come in, and then anybody else.
Stimulate thoughts around the question. And the question really is, is the government shaping the destiny of the Black community? I would say we need not to forget that we live in a liberal democracy. And that means a lot to me, because it means in that liberal democracy, there is a framework that government takes responsibility for providing in this whole country. But the liberal part says those of us who are within this framework are free to choose what we do, provided we stay within the law. So I think there are some big things which all of us should agree we can't do individually or in small groups, and that is to defend the nation from a hostile foreign nation, or to provide adequate health care for a nation that has a multiplicity of diseases or illnesses that need to be addressed. And there are other big issues. So in that respect, I think governments contribute to the destiny by creating the right liberal democratic framework. But I agree once again with the idea that Joe has put forward now more than once. Having at least a couple of fully competent think tanks that is dedicated to generating ideas for getting our community from where we are to a better place is absolutely essential, and it's decades overdue. So if anyone who is a strategic thinker from our community listening to this conversation or watching this video in due course feels that that is something that they can bring to our community, please contact Reach Society, because we would like to sit at that table, because that is the gap. And I'm not going back over the conversation we've had about elites or about community groups or the conversation that we're having about government. This is very much about being strategic. And at the moment, I do not see any group, any device, any initiative in our community that is rising to that challenge.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to come in? And what, I mean, it may not necessarily be the question about government, but I like what Joe is saying. And I'm trying to rack my brain if there ever is a black think tank. I know about the Runnymede Trust, but they're not necessarily.
That is not a black think tank.
That's not a think tank.
It's the closest one.
It may be a think tank. It's not a black one.
No. Yeah. But you know what think tanks are? We all know, don't we? You know, they've been around for years. The institutes of policy, political studies. There's so many.
Yeah, but Donald, if I could dive in there, my working understanding of think tanks is that they are generating thoughts. They are thought leadership groups. And that is what we just don't have enough of. We have some very worthy groups in our community, but the thought leadership around our future, our destiny in this country, I am not aware of any. And that, I believe, is where Joe is pointing to.
Yeah, Donald, I think it's a great idea. I think that I did end my introduction by saying that I did think we needed to not just be open and honest, but be creative in coming up with some of the solutions, And I think that the think tank, I think, is a brilliant idea, I think, in terms of moving us forward. And I think there is enough great minds in the community to us at least to have two to kind of come up with some of the ideas and try to find some solutions to some of the pressing problems that we have. Great idea.
Yeah, Angela, Michelle, what's your thoughts on government or think tanks, you know, in terms of shaping our destiny? Or the idea of thought leadership? Which is,
do you want to go first? Or?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you said that, I was immediately thinking about this organization, Black Leaders, who say that they're leading Black inclusion in the UK. And I think there are organizations who are wanting to do what we are discussing on this platform. Whether they have the recognition, whether they have, you know, whether they are visible enough. And Dwain, you say you don't see any, you don't see it because that's the issue, that we are not visible enough. And I don't know if it's because we're not shouting loud enough. I don't know if we, you know, our voice is not being heard. There are organizations out there who want to collaborate, who want to bring communities together to address specific issues and priorities. And the Council of Leaders is an example of that. But we've not mentioned that on this platform. But that's one group, for want of a better word, that are, you know, that have the destiny of Black people in mind and want to make a difference. But again, the profile hasn't been raised. We're not there yet. But we are working away. You know, underneath, we are trying to make waves, trying to we are making contributions with the backing of organizations like ours on this platform, and obviously reach society. So it is going to take a coming together, I believe, for us to kind of stand up and be counted. That collaboration has to happen.
Michelle, your thoughts? Because I notice in other diverse groups that they do have, figureheads or figure organization, where other community groups are an umbrella, and then you have like the Board of Deputy Jews. You've also got the British Muslim Association. Hope I've got the name correct. You got so they, they are there, and you've got the smaller groups. So it's just literally there's an I don't know. I hope I'm getting this right. There's many groups in our community. Is there a group that they can all interact and engage with to, as Paul says, exchange ideas and see how they can progress in the future? What's your thoughts, Michelle?
I don't know if there's one single group. But I probably could do some research and find that. I am definitely for the idea of think tanks, for sure. But I guess, a conversation around think tanks, which really I would say, let's, take that forward. It's about defining that and being really clear about what the group, what they're thinking about, really. Because I think too, as Angela said, COL could be considered as a think tank, and truly there are loads and loads and loads of such things going on, even tonight online. There's Garvey Village, there's African something, there's so many groups of Black people getting together and having similar conversations, right? Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. If we're talking about think tank, sometimes I think about think tank in terms of Washington, D.C., the presidency of the United States, the way the United States run. They fund a think tank in science. They fund a think tank for the environment to literally look at research, empirical, draw evidence together to then make recommendations about a way forward, about the destiny for the environment, about the destiny for the military, about the destiny. So are we thinking think tank on that level? And that's, to me, that's an important thing, because those think tanks that I just gave an example of, that I just gave as examples, are linked to power. And so you can have a think tank. We're doing a lot of thinking on this call, and I mentioned others, groups that are doing a lot of thinking, but it's whether you have a think tank that is set up in a way that it is linked to power, that can actually make a difference nationally, in communities, in terms of law, in terms of economic structure. And the question that was first asked around, is the government shaping the destiny? I say yes, but negatively and positively. Because negatively, because we know that the socioeconomic structure that we're living in was set up so long ago that still causes the inequalities to persist. So that is entrenched in the financial structure in our society. The fact that the government hasn't dismantled that, I'm saying it's shaping our destiny to continue to have these inequalities in our society. So it's shaping the destiny, but in a negative way. And so the point I'm trying to make is, unless a think tank can link to real power, then it's just another conversation like we're having here.
Yeah, that could be true. It could just be, but I mean, I'm just looking at my phone, and one of the things that we're probably all aware of, and the idea of, can we get a collective voice that Joe was mentioned and Dwain, you all touched on, and the Voice newspaper, as you may or may not know, is trying to do a survey. The Black British Voice survey, which closes at the end of this month. And potentially that could be, I don't know if you've all heard of it, that could potentially be, a signpost, couldn't it? So that it's at least got the views of many folks in the community. I don't know who's organizing it. I don't know the people involved, but it seems, doesn't it, that they are trying to garner the views. Joe, you mentioned about identity. So what do you guys think of that approach? Because in a sense, that's what it's trying to do, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, I've already cast my tuppenny, halfpenny worth into that piece of research. Like you, I don't know the people behind it, but I did read. I mean, it's a university that's leading on it. Can't remember which one, but you know, I think what for me was a winner was it is likely to have some academic rigor, and we'll see what it says. It will give us a snapshot of what we think, you know, what kind of community do we, what do we look like as a community, and so forth. Now, that kind of thing, I mean, I mentioned think tanks, and of course that could come in various shapes and sizes, but I think also, I don't know if it's Dwain who picked up the idea of, you know, thought leadership. Now, what I'm keen on is thought leadership that is multiple.
Yeah.
It's not just dominated by one, you know, sort of liberal left or right. Or I would love to see us as a community feel free to do the kind of things that university courses are meant to do. Make you ask the questions that shouldn't be asked, right? We need to talk about us in ways that are less limiting at the moment. So for example, here's one question. I would love to know, you know, what is the long-term effect of most of our elite leaders being married to spouses outside of the ethnic group? I would love for somebody to do a piece of work around that. Give me a sense of what does that look and feel like, and what's the likelihood, or what's the likely effect of that in terms of prestige and personal view of self. I'd love that. That's a question that you can't ask, right? But I say somebody should ask that. Must we always, here's another question, must we always, you know, start off from the perspective that our biggest problem in this society is racism, and therefore everything must be seen through the lens of race? Do we not have any cosmological approach that would say a Pan-African concept of who we are, where we link ourselves to the wider Pan-African group beyond our ethnic minority status here, where we're part of a much broader canvas, and we didn't see only Britain as a possible home, but actually now we open up and we say, listen, you could live in the Caribbean, you could live in Africa, you could live anywhere you want to. So if you get tired of racism around here, you're not going to stay here and just feel browbeaten by it. What are the possibilities elsewhere? I would love to see us as a community being less paranoid and being less willing to center whiteness and the 500-year-old issues we have with whiteness, and plot a way forward that shows us, not Marcus Garvey's, you know, return to Africa on the boat necessarily, but at least some ideological nuance that takes us beyond the way we are at the moment. And I'm afraid I don't think we're likely to get that if we're being led by the elite. I think we're more likely to get that if we as a community, with all of our complexities, can feed into various streams of competing thoughts.
I see a day when we get all community in a massive hall and have workshops.
Yeah. Can I just say though?
Yeah, what's the comment from
interesting question: is the government shaping the destiny of the modern Black community? Yes. Given the hostile environment that they've actually created. So I agree with Dwain that of course they're responsible in a democracy for, you know, establishing the framework so Black people can live in a free and equal society. Yeah. But at the moment, that's not necessarily the environment that they've actually created. They've created a very hostile environment. And when you talk about elites, are some of the people in the government, the minority people in the government, are they seen as being elites? Because some of them exhibit quite, I don't know what you call it really, kind of a racelessness facade in order to try and achieve some sort of upward mobility. It seems to be that the only thing that they want. Yeah. So, I mean, I agree with you, Joe, that, you know, I do think that we really do need to start to think of ourselves differently. And we need to try and find out, well, what does this old concept of being black means? Because I talk to so many people about it and it means so many different things. I can talk to my son, you know, later and he'll give me one description, and I'll see my daughter tomorrow and she'll say something else, because they're born here and they've developed as individuals, as well as being members of a community. So I agree. I mean, I really do think this is a great discussion. Yeah. But my view, and the reason why we're discussing it, is that we need to try and find a way to take more control of our lives and what happens to us, right? We can't take 100% control of it, but we really do need, I feel really strongly about it. This is why I've been doing this work for so long. And we can do it. It's not, I think it's hard, but we can do it. But that's how I see it. We need to find a way to take control of our lives so we don't have to rely on government. If we take control of our lives, Donald, we wouldn't be getting this hostile environment if we were in control. It wouldn't be happening.
But you say rely on government, but government themselves are relying on the communities to find the solutions.
Yeah.
No, I know. I'm not suggesting to rely on government.
No. Oh, right. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that.
So what about the other G? And that's God. That's religion. You know. So what about that? Do we believe that God or religion can be involved or is responsible for shaping the destiny of our community? Joe, I'll come to you first.
Well, I'm kind of a natural sitting target for this one.
Yeah.
Well, I'm an ecumenist, which means that I work right across the various churches and sometimes across faiths. Yeah. And I know just how complex the church is. It's a hugely pluriform situation. I read the other day that there are 22,000 different denominations in the world. I don't know who counted them. But what it means is that you have there, 22,000 different views about God, who God is, what God requires, and so forth. So in the end, if you're an ecumenist like me, what you do is you take a bit of a summation of all of that. And the summation of all of that might be summed up in Jesus's words, or the words attributed to Jesus, that the key to everything is love, that you love God, you love yourself, and you love your neighbor as yourself. Now, if we could all grab hold of that, that was Bishop, or what's his name, Curry's sermon at the royal wedding, of course, the power of love, the fire of love. I think if we could get away somewhat from denominational attitudes to life. If you are a Seventh-day Adventist, then everybody else is damned if they don't worship on the Saturday. If you are a Trinitarian, everybody else is damned if they don't believe in the Trinity. If you are a Oneness Pentecostal, everybody else is damned if they don't believe in oneness, and so on. If we can get beyond that, even if we hold on to those views, if we get beyond those and get to the principal issues about what faith is trying to do with us, to make us reflect the better qualities of being human, that by loving self and loving other, having loved God, then I think, yes, faith can have a view. But even where it is denominationalized, and I was saying earlier, I've grown up in a particular denomination. I don't pay much attention to it now, and the walls that it erects. But even within that, I'm saying to you, as I said earlier, I found mentors who were able to challenge me about my personal life, mentors who were able to build structures like the housing association that I mentioned. Just one example. So I find that even when you distill it down into the fragments that it's made of, that you can still find some useful things, and good work is being done. But oh, do I wish that we could together, and that is the work of ecumenical relations that I do and have done for many years. If we can distill it down together, where we say, yeah, we belong to different segments, different orders, but actually we all believe in the creator God and the sustainer God. And what we now do is work together for the betterment of society. I think if we take that posture, then the answer to your question is yes, God in that sense can help. Where God does not help, though, is in some predetermined way that, I regret at the moment the way in which, for example, prayer has become part of the performing arts. People are almost now going to be doing degrees in prayer. Now, what on earth does that mean? If you listen to Jesus saying, don't pray like the scribes and Pharisees pray, right? They're hypocrites. When they pray, they don't wash their face. They put on long gowns and they have matter in the eye. Jesus never really said that, but to make you believe that they're pious and they pray and God hears them. Jesus says God don't hear them at all, right? When you pray, go into your closet, close the door, pray to God in secret that God is going to speak to you when you open it. So I think there's some hypocrisy around faith, and I'm seeing some of the exhibitionist virtues of praying at the moment as part of that, building up people's beliefs and views as if, if you pray hard, you're not going to die, when actually you are going to die. When you get to the point, you must look after yourself, look after your body, build up your immune system and so on. So anyway, my main point is, yes, faith and God can be a help in building community if we focus on the virtues of faith rather than our denominationalized versions of faith.
Angela, you're shaking your head.
Yeah,
and I know you are doing, you work closely with a number of Black churches. What's your thoughts on this? Can God be involved in shaping the destiny of our community? What's your thoughts on that?
There's a charity that was born out of a church, a faith-based charity. I definitely do. I think that certainly with RAFFA, again, I suppose it is, like Joe says, it's not looking at it from a denomination perspective. It's actually just looking at what are we supposed to be doing? We are supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves. We are supposed to not just talk about it, but we are supposed to put it into practice. So through the charity, through RAFFA, we are able to actually demonstrate those practical aspects of what the Bible says. So, you give of your expertise, you give of your knowledge, but you don't expect anything in return. You're doing it so that other people can be edified and other people can be sustained or become sustainable. So yes, I do definitely feel that very much in the work that certainly I do on a day-to-day basis, getting involved in all areas, whether it be health and well-being, whether it be working with the NHS, working with local government, working with various organizations. Yes, it has a definite place.
Thank you. Michelle, the role of, I noticed Joe mentioned immunity. I'm not even going to touch COVID. I'm not going to touch COVID because, although I will say, what I will say, one thing, and get your thoughts on this, Michelle, and others, the impact of faith on our community, I will say, is massive. It's I often wonder, and not just in this country, but I know in the States as well. And someone ages ago about Martin Luther King said if Martin Luther King wasn't religious, he felt that the Black community and the impact of the civil rights movement would not be as strong as it is because, of our links with faith. Michelle, what's your thoughts on faith? But we're not talking COVID.
I think faith plays a big part. Church, religion plays a huge part in shaping destiny because it's one of the most powerful shapers of people's thinking. One of the most powerful shapers of people's understanding of themselves and of the world and of their community. It shapes people's perspectives on pretty much everything pertaining to life. Yeah, it's a very, very powerful medium. That pulpit, those cell groups, those church leaders, pastors, teachers, preachers, evangelists, all the fivefold ministry. The fact that it is rooted as well, it's something that God has set up. That's God's structure, church. That's his structure for us in society, living in society. And so it is a powerful shaper of destiny. Of course it is. So in terms of shaping the Black destiny of the Black community, again, you said it, Donald, you stole my thunder. You know, a large proportion of Black people attend church regularly, sometimes 3 times a week or nightly if the church happens to be fasting. And I'm happy, I'm just being tongue in cheek here. But certainly, long answer short, yes, it is a powerful shaper of destiny in the Black community, simply because a lot of Black people attend church, and church has that spiritual power quite legitimately, but also influences through that people's views and opinions, and in fact, even their level of engagement with secular things in society. You know, so yes is the answer.
No, you're absolutely right. I was reflecting on this growing up, particularly my mum wasn't really a churchgoer. We used to go to church because she forced us to in the Black Mariah vans. But I remember growing up, and the impact of racism back then in the 60s and 70s was hard. But they just kind of said, well, don't worry, God will provide. That is that one as a teenager, as a kid growing up. And so in a sense, they kind of relied on God will provide. And it's only when I got older, I realized,
but it was true. Did he not provide? I'm sure he did. But you see, that's the thing that faith gives us, is hope. Yeah. Is hope. Faith offers that hope. That no matter how bad things are, that there is a higher power who is just, who is loving.
Amen, sister.
As Pastor said and Angela said, and who, according to the Bible anyway, works all things together for good. So that's the importance of faith shaping destiny. Faith helps us not to give up, actually, when things get tough.
No, I remember Obama, that book, The Audacity of Hope.
Cool. I mean, brilliant, Michelle. I completely agree. You know, I mean, faith, I think is a very, very, very powerful medium. I mean, I noticed you mentioned 3 times a week. Well, when I was in Jamaica, I had to go 3 times every Sunday. It was morning service. The Reverend recognizes it, you know, after the service, and then of course evening service. My grandparents, because by that time my mom and dad were here, and my grandparents were very religious, seriously religious. 3 times every Sunday we went to church. So yes, I mean, I think that for me personally, I think it just shapes so much things, you know, established norms around behavior. It gave order and structure. It can give order and structure to your life. It can help you to understand each other's actions. I mean, I think it can provide so much. And I'm kind of guilty because I don't go to church as much as I used to, but I tell you, that foundation has seen me through my life. And I've told my kids that it's powerful. Maybe because I went to the right church and I grew up in a good community, local community in Jamaica, I don't know, but it's the most powerful experience I think I've ever been through. It's shaped everything that I even believe into today, even though I don't go to church often. So yes, I think it has a crucial role.
Your thoughts on this subject?
Sorry, who are you calling to, Donald?
I was calling you, Dwain. We haven't heard from you.
Yeah, I just didn't hear my name. I just heard your thoughts. On the principle that you're calling on me, I'm inclined to agree with much of what's been said, but I do depart for me in a significant way.
I knew that. That's why I left you till the end.
Well, I'm a Sunday school boy like most people here, so I've had that exposure. And through Sunday school, there is no doubt that the value system I live by is based on that. So I would absolutely say, because of Sunday school, I'm in touch with my sense of spirituality, and I've always been spiritual. So I'm not following any particular denomination because I frankly don't need it. And if I want to connect with God, I just have a prayer that I say there and then and share my thoughts. And so once I've disconnected from the tyranny of a denomination, I kept my spirituality and I kept my direct connection. So the hope part,
He
I
said
get.
tyranny.
Yeah, the tyranny of denomination, because if you're not a card carrying, this is what Joel was saying, you know, 22,000 denominations, give me a break, for goodness sake. But, you know, the hope part is quite clear, because if you believe that there is a higher power, then it really does sustain you. The values from the 10 Commandments and the like, absolutely, because it's about good citizenship. But where I depart from all of that holier than thou stuff is I know that to make a difference at any stage in our lives, in our community, and shape our destiny requires a huge dose of agency. And so the story that has stayed with me from my Sunday school days is the one of the man with the cart stuck in the mud. And he's praying from night till day till kingdom come, and didn't bother to put his shoulder to the wheel where, if you like, the divine intervention would have happened. So for me, within our community, it is that component of support from God that I would want to play up most, because that's where I think we need to go. So if we're going to draw on the whole experience of God and faith, it's the bit which says agency. If you want to get there, if you want to make it happen, if you want to shape that destiny, agency. Yeah. And, you know, I hold on to another saying, which most of you who know me, and when we come to management team meeting or when I give talks, you know, I like Robert Kennedy's quote. And that quote is, "The future is not a gift, it's an achievement." The future is not a gift, it's an achievement. You gotta work to make it happen. That feels like it comes straight off the put your shoulder to the wheel, man. All the prayer in the world ain't gonna make the difference if you don't put some effort in there. Achieve it. So that for me is the connection with God, not so much all the tuppence in the denomination, agency. And you can draw on that hope.
Thank you, Dwayne. Joe, I don't know if you want to come back on that.
Well, I mean, you know, Dwayne started out by making that sound like, you know, this is off of this planet. I mean, that is very much down the road of people like myself. Take my reference to prayer becoming part of the performing arts. You know, my thinking around faith and the question of agency is absolute. You know, the way in which I've got an article coming out next year in Black Theology, the journal, the International Journal, where I'm taking up the Jeremiah story that I mentioned earlier. And one of the pieces in that is the role of agency. God very rarely, and I've lived a long life now, very rarely has performed miracles by just, you know, bursting through the clouds. Most of the miracles in my life, 99% of them, have been ones where I've worked really, really hard, you know, and suddenly, you know, if it's a PhD you're pursuing, as I did in older age, you know, you stand there on that platform and accept your certificate that you, and it drops through the letterbox, you know, feels like a miracle. If you were born where I was born, a little bush place in Top Norton, St. Catherine. Right, but it's the result of dedicated hard work, which is not peculiar to me. But we have to take agency seriously. Not all, you know. I listen. Can I just confess? It's when people invite me to their prayer meetings these days, I don't go. Especially if you're inviting me to an all-night prayer meeting. All night? You think I need to pray to God for all night? No, I don't. Right, and I was in Kitsentown in Jamaica speaking a couple of years back. I was saying to them, you know, you guys is a Baptist church, and they have all kind of all-night prayer meetings. So some of the time when you come to these all-night into Jamaican patois now, some of the time when you come to these all-night prayer meetings, spend the first half of the night strategizing, thinking about how could you turn Kitsentown around. How could you set up systems so that you could be doing business with people in China now that the superhighway has opened that up. No amount of staying on your knee all night ain't gonna reveal how you do that, right? So for me, my mother used to call it prayer and potato. She said prayer and potato go together, right? Potato on its own, no. Prayer on its own, no. But prayer and potato, and the old adage that God helps them who help themselves remain true. So Dwain, I'm not as far away from you on that philosophy as you might think.
We're coming towards the end because I know we've got to, it's about 10 past and we've got to finish this within 2 hours. So there's 2 more questions. And so I'd like your answers to be short. And the first question I'd like to ask you all is really, we've talked about community groups, the so-called elites or leaders, government, religion. What about the Black community itself? You know, does it matter, you know, whether we all collectively think about our destiny? Is it something we should all collectively think about? You know, does it matter whether the modern Black community thinks about its destiny in the UK? Anyone can take that question. So it's not just community groups. It's maybe to the point Paul commented, it's about taking self-responsibility. So it is a case collectively. And just to get you guys thinking about this, I've spoken to many people, and it's partly what Joe was saying, but Black people all over in the UK, no matter what, are aware of systemic racism. So there is, maybe that's something that could be as a glue, but they're all aware of it. Thoughts? Anyone can go for this one?
Yeah, Donald, let me dive in here.
Okay, Dwain, I'll let you go first.
You know, does it matter, you know, whether the Black community thinks about our destiny or not? My short answer is it absolutely matters. Because if we settle into the community where we don't spare a thought for our future, then there's a very good chance we're going to end up somewhere else. And, you know, let's just draw on the COVID experience and all the hesitancy. There are a lot of folks out there who thinks it doesn't matter to get the jab. But the reality is the people who are dying now, white or Black, so this isn't just peculiar to the Black community, are the ones who are dying despite the protection being there. You know, 99.5% of the deaths in this country and the state are unvaccinated people. And I would take that one example and expand it to the whole community. Does it matter that our community should or shouldn't think about our destiny? It absolutely does. Yeah, and it fits in again with the comment I shared, you know, the Robert Kennedy saying, the future is not a gift. Yeah, it's an achievement.
I guess the
Does
question
it matter? Yes,
go on, Angela.
I said, does it matter? Yes, it does matter. And that's why many of us do what we do. That's why the Enfield Caribbean Association is there. That's why RAFFA is there, because yes, it does matter. It does matter if we are dying disproportionately because of something that we can prevent. So yes, it does matter. It does.
100%, really.
Yeah.
I think I would agree completely with what Angela said. I think it does really matter.
And I'm not just talking about COVID, I'm talking about
generally,
the whole raft of inequalities.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to aim to get some sort of a collective of agreement about what it is and where we want to go. We need, well, Joe and Dwain is saying agency. Yes, we do need to have a plan about, we can't just kind of just continue just to be reacting to things all the time, because that's what we do. And I think that needs to change. And I do believe, echoing what Joe said, there are enough members in our community that can change, in spite of the tensions that exist. I think it's definitely possible. I think we just have to develop. I think it might be, and I know that get a bit boring. I mentioned this to Wayne the other day. I'm a very process-driven person, and I believe that there are always stages in things that you have to, there are always hurdles that you have to come before you get to a particular point. But that's where I think that, you know, Joe's idea about having these two think tanks, I think is really a good idea. And I think if you set up something like that and you have very clear terms of reference about how it's supposed to work, I think it's definitely possible. But yeah, yes, it does matter, I think.
To get you guys thinking in terms of, you know, it's, you know, destiny of our future. Angela mentioned something, you know, and I hate to use COVID, but I want to use it in this respect. One of the things COVID has done is to highlight, and I'm going to specifically talk about health inequalities more than ever before. So the idea that certain diseases has an impact on our community, or that we weren't being screened, etc., etc. The question now is, post-COVID, things can't be the same. And so the question then I would want to ask you, you know, who in our community now will take charge of our health? Because now we all know COVID has shined a light on the health inequalities in the United Kingdom. You know, you may have argued, and people were fighting to, you know, for screening processes for our community, etc., etc. We don't know more testing for our community in terms of diabetes. Now,
but you see,
so
can I come in?
Yeah. Anyway.
Let me say this. I presented, I do a bit of broadcasting with the BBC, and for 10 years I presented a local program in the West Midlands on BBC WM, and interviewed hundreds of people during that time. And one of the times over those years, Dr Adebayo, who comes on Radio 5 Live and Radio London, came into Birmingham to do some research. He was talking to various communities, the Bangladeshi community, the Pakistani community, the Irish community, and of course, the African Caribbean community. Came in to talk to me on the program the night. And he said something struck him as he was doing this during the day. He said, all of those communities, Bangladeshi, Pakistan, etc., when he said to them, now, who are your leaders? They were able to identify their leaders. When you talk to the Caribbean people, they say, we don't have no leader, right? We have tended to resist this sense of togetherness and accepting leadership and being focused. And it's one of the things that I fear that will continue to hamper us if we don't get over it. I think it's something the Black Church actually has to teach the Black community. The way in which, I was mentioning earlier, some of my leaders in the past who, you know, never got a certificate at school, but they were my leaders. So I got my degrees, but they were my leaders, and I accepted their leadership. So I think somehow, our community is going to have to become a kind of self-defining, but self-defining around issues and around those people who are doing things on our behalf, and where we rally and row behind them to get things done in our joint benefit. And you know, it starts with us. Jesus, in his great message, I'm a great follower of Jesus, by the way, so I love the sayings of Jesus. But you know, when Jesus says, and love your neighbor as yourself, therein lies not a paradox, a very plain ideology that if you don't love yourself, you can't love your neighbor, right? If you don't hug yourself, you can't really. And if you don't hug people that look like you can't really put a hug around the world. So I may have gone away from your basic question, but what I'm appealing for among us is that sense of humility and cohesion, that sense that those who will be our leaders aren't always the stars, but actually, if we can just see ourselves in each other and love that self and love that other, then we stand a chance. Otherwise, my final word, we become absorbed into other people's projects.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. Michelle, you work in the NHS. You know, now the health inequalities are wide open.
Yes.
I have this really worried concern now, is that if we, and I talk about all of us collectively, you know, this is a window of opportunity to hold people accountable. Are we effective? So the community as a whole, we pay our taxes, etc. Are we holding authorities? I mean, classical, for example, Black women are 4 to 5 times likely now, you know, in terms to die in pregnancy. Yeah. I read a report that said, oh yeah, we might need to look into this. That was the one line I saw. And I'm thinking, man, we got to do something.
Yeah. So a lot, I mean, you're absolutely right. So the inequalities in health have been long-standing. Yeah. And COVID shone a light on them. And I think George Floyd's murder as well also added to that shocking reality of the impact of race on health, but the broad determinants of life in general, really. And so, yes, certainly the statistic you just mentioned about maternity services, that is embedded now. You know, we have the first Black chief midwifery officer. So we've always had a chief nursing officer, but this is the first time England has created the post of chief midwifery officer, and that was given to Professor Jacqueline Dunkley Bent, sorry. She's a Black female, okay? So actually we've seen that policy already written, and maternity services are gearing up to meeting the standards now and to address that specific stat that you just shared. The issue within the NHS is that accountability, yeah? So we have a law, the Equality Act, that we have all, as public sector organizations, have a duty to adhere to and be compliant with. But very rarely is the NHS itself ever held to account for when it breaks that law, and it breaks that law routinely. Yeah. I'm not saying that nothing is ever done mindful of inequalities or of that law, but we haven't yet covered all of our bases with regards to that, whether it's to do with the workforce or to do with patients and the public. However, another policy that has been embedded, which is now actually materializing in the systems that I work in, the integrated care system. So Northwest London has one. So London has 5 integrated care systems. Northwest London, where I work, is the largest, 2.2 million people we are looking after. All over England, we have these ICSs. And all of the ICSs now have something called population health management units. And the population health management units were birthed this year specifically to address the part of the Health and Social Care Act 2012 that gives a legal duty to narrow and to address inequalities in health, okay? So there's now structure within the governance, there's now sections within the governance structure in these organizations set up specifically, and that's all they do, is looking at population health data, looking at public health data, joint strategic needs assessments, continually collecting quantitative data in terms of population, community, right down to ward level, street level, okay? So they have that kind of data to then look at, you know, compared with hospital data, primary care data, to look at where these pockets of and prevalences of illness and deprivation, and in fact, the wider determinants of health, okay? We're working closely with public health, which looks at that broad, you know, the determinants of health, housing, environment, and all the like, everything that feeds into somebody's health and well-being.
All right, thank you.
So accountability is being built. But what I also want to say is that I agree wholeheartedly with this idea of agency. Now, I am a believer in God, but I believe you have a purpose in God, and you have to partner with him. You have to do your part. Faith without works is dead. James chapter 2, I think it's verse 14. Faith without works is dead. That's what Dwain was saying. That's what Joe was saying, okay, about agency. And I'm a active proponent of that view. My first book, Do Great Exploits, was written for the church to hopefully wake them up to the fact that It is not only prayer and hoping and wishing and fasting. We are called to work. God himself says, faith without works is dead. Okay, so you got to work. You got to do what you need to do. You have to apply discipline. You have to learn the knowledge. You have to acquire the intelligence, the understanding that you need to do what you want to do, to do what you're called to do, whether it's business, engineering, science, whatever it is. Okay, so that is my position also. But what I want to say as well, in light of that,
one more question.
I'll go quickly. In light of that is, you made a statement earlier on in asking me this question. You said, so we weren't getting the screening. So that is a common misconception of some of the challenges we're facing in the NHS around these very inequalities.
Yeah.
Because now I know the story of prostate cancer, and I know the story of Black cancer care and the impact they've had at parliamentary level with shifting the screening age for Black men. But when you're talking about cervical screening, when you look at the inequalities there, you're seeing the Black women, the Asian women, Black women in particular, the outcomes are poor. And why? Every year we are all called, we receive a letter saying, come for your screen.
Yeah.
We invest additional funds to raise awareness, to promote, to practically beg Black women to come in to get their screens. Are they coming for their screens?
Yeah.
Not really.
So more.
Breast cancer, you name it.
Yeah.
So when you say we don't get our screening, it's not that we are not offering it or asking you for it. We're incentivizing all kinds of GP practices, etc., to go out and outreach and raise awareness. We're investing in community champions to get people to come, but we're still not seeing the agency, the choice that every individual has to take responsibility for themselves, whether it's to do with health, money, their children, otherwise. There's only so much the system can do.
Yeah.
You also need to shape your destiny as an individual.
There's some evidence whereby the type of approach that's been done in the past, you have seen increase. And not for this discussion, but the terminology of hard to reach is one that needs to be challenged.
Definitely not for this discussion.
Yeah, you need to.
But we can have that discussion.
Yeah, but what I will say, Michelle, which is what I love with my people, we always can quote scripture. I love it. I love the fact that I just love my people.
And we usually quote it from.
I didn't make that stuff up, man. Somebody made that stuff up, right?
And it's, can I just say,
where it came from.
And may I just say, it is better when quoted from the King James, right?
Let me come to my final question.
So sorry, that's my long answer to the question.
No, love it. So my final question, and in case you weren't, I think Joe mentioned this, what is the modern Black community? And Dwain and I have often spoken about this. We use the Windrush as the catalyst. We definitely know that there were Black people before the Windrush. Studies have shown that it's the evidence is there. But we often use the Windrush as a catalyst, and that led to the wave migration, and it's led to multiculturalism as we know it. And so we use that signpost, and you think 70 years on, look how far our community has gone. So my question is, where do you see us, our community, in another 70, in another 100 years' time? 2121, for example. Where do you see us going?
Let me jump in there, Donald, because the long-term vision is an important one, because we've been talking for the last couple of hours about who's responsible for the destiny of our community. So, looking down the road 100 years, what I would say is that we collectively in the Black community have got to be clear about where we want to be. And I would make the comparison by saying the Office of National Statistics tell us that just under 30% of Black people in employment fall into the upper income brackets. you know, the senior professionals and the like, just under 30%. From my standpoint, a realistic target would be 100 years from now, at least 80% of our community are in that category. In other words, euphemistically referred to as middle class. And the reason why I use that term is because we know there is a mindset, there is a behavior, there is an approach to looking after children, nurturing children, inspiring children, and helping those children to become viable so they can compete for jobs to give them the income they need to have the sort of life that they choose, not a life that they're relegated to because they're just poor and they're unqualified and they lack experience and they don't know what's going on in the country of their birth. So compared to where we are now, in 100 years' time, my very simple ambition is that we will take the necessary action so that our community is disproportionately in that middle class category. And here is what my business experience has taught me. We live in a rich country, the United Kingdom. We have a community of over 3 million people. That's the Black community in the UK. And we, all of us, are associated with a family. I believe if we were able to manage our families in a viable way, if we were able to collaborate in ways that makes our community resilient, and we take on all the responsibility for the things that impact our lives in the UK, my ambition of having 80% of children brought up in middle-class families would be easily achievable. But we've got to actually do the work at the family level. We've got to actually do the work at the community level. The shape of the UK will be governed by government and others, but we're part of that United Kingdom of 65 million people. And we've got to be clear about how we play our part at the family level, at the community level, within the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Dwain. Anyone else? As we said,
So,
this is our last question.
Indeed. So you're talking about 10 years or 100 years down the line, whatever
10,
number
20,
we want to put on it, 20 years. Maybe there are 2 or 3 things I would love to see. I'd love to see us more at ease with ourselves, loving ourselves more, actually believing more in ourselves. That, I think, would lead on to playing our agency role in society. I so much agreed with what Michelle was saying a while ago. I too dabbled around the health service, not as anybody with medical knowledge or skills, but in a sort of chairman's role. And I can tell you, we don't use our agency very well. You know, we talk about COVID, the percentage of us resisting the vaccine. You cannot get away from that. That's likely to put us in a precipitative position with regard to COVID. You talk about prostate cancer, and we are so much higher a rate amongst prostate sufferers, but our men won't go because they don't want nobody touch them things, right? So we have to learn about how we use our agency and not just make demands on the system. And thirdly, I hope that we would collaborate more, particularly, first of all, here, the 3 million of us, in whatever way we can do that, but particularly, as I said before, with the African diaspora, both in the mainland of Africa, as well as in other places around the world, and see ourselves as part of that extended family. So that here, for example, if we feel that the NHS is not delivering for us in a particular area and we are playing our agency part, then we combine together to put pressure on the system to move the system in the direction that we would like to go. So as I said, a greater sense of self-love, I want to see, a greater sense of that agency. That means we don't just, tell people what they must do for us, but we recognize that actually the system will move when we use our influence to make it do what we want. And thirdly, a greater sense of a Pan-Africanist approach to our existence, where we by that affirm our identity and give us a better place of standing, of upstandingness in the UK society, if this is where we choose to continue to live.
Thank you, Joe.
I'll go next.
Ourselves, yeah.
I'll go next. Few points. First of all, yes, Michelle, what you were saying, I wholeheartedly agree with. Bearing in mind that we were one of those organizations or community organizations who were asked to get involved in the Cancer Does Not Discriminate campaign all those years ago for that very reason, because this issue about raising awareness is so important. And I feel that is something that really we can't stop doing. We need to keep raising awareness about issues that affect us as Black people. We need to educate and we need to inform so that people make the right choices. And I think that will definitely have an impact on our futures. What Dwain was talking about the family, again, so important. I think it's because of our limited knowledge about our identity, about our history. Our history didn't begin in 1948 or didn't begin when the Windrush came here. In the 1500s, we had African business owners here. But how much of that is actually being taught or told? Well, we know it's not being taught in schools, but how much of it are we even talking about in the family? How much do we know about it in the family? So that, again, I feel does need to be encouraged. And the final thing that I will say is I also, because in my head, while you were speaking, was that same scripture about faith without works is dead. And I see what my role is and what RAFFA is doing is actually doing the works bit. The faith is there, but it's actually doing the works. It's making sure that we do, that we support, that we share love our neighbor as ourselves, demonstrate it. So that's my 3. And I feel that if we, I think if we concentrate on those areas, I think we will come a long way in 10 years, 15 years time. And you see these young people that are coming up, they're not silent like we were. So their voices will be magnified as they move forward. But we need to still have that, we need to still inform and educate. And that's me done.
Thank you. It's in the young.
Yeah.
Where do we see ourselves in 20, 30, 40, 50 years?
I would share that, Donald. I think that's very well said, Ange. I mean, I think that you're right. I mean, people already stole my thunder, but I mean, a big thing for me is what I think it was I can't remember how many years ago, a conversation with Dwain about cultural esteem. And I think the big thing for me is building self-esteem within our community. And we can certainly do that by learning a lot more about our history and our culture. I mean, I do really think it's key. I agree completely with the family. I do think that the England that I arrived in, we had a very strong family structures. Maybe I'm being idealistic, but that's what my memory was of the Black community that I arrived in. And I think that we need to reinvest in trying to rebuild that kind of family structure. I think would be really, really important. I also think that it was something that you were saying, I think, Joe, I think it is about investing in ourselves spiritually, but I just feel that it's about, we need to take further. It's also about reinvesting ourselves intellectually as well as professionally and economically. I think that there's something about that we need to, if we can build that self-esteem, we can begin to realize that, although I agree with most of the things you've said, Joe, but as citizens of the UK, I kind of sense that because of the experiences that we have, a lot of us still don't feel as if we belong. And that is also contributing to the fact of us not really working together collectively, because it's almost like we haven't actually invested in it. I belong somewhere else. And so although I'm here physically, mentally speaking, spirit, I'm somewhere else because I don't feel as if I belong. And I would confess I used to feel that way, but it's through my kids and my grandkids, I mean, they're all born here, is when I learned to invest myself in this country. This is my country. This is where I belong. This is where my wife belongs, my kids and my grandchildren belong. And I think it's quite a big issue still in our community. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how it feels. So I think that's a major issue in terms of us making a statement about being citizens of the UK.
Thank you. Michelle, I think you are the last one.
So very quickly, because in fact, I am in full agreement with every point that has been shared. Just to emphasize, I guess, definitely the family issue is a big deal for me. I just think that is the core, that's the nucleus of it all. That's the smallest unit of the Black community, is the Black family. And if that's not working, then the community as a whole really can't work as well. And we're seeing that playing out now with the kind of chaotic family structures that that exist in some aspects, some parts of our community. The other thing I want to see is, Dwain, for me, I just really think economic strength is vitally important, vital. And so when Dwain was talking about middle class, definitely, but what I jotted down here in explicit terms is what I want to see in 20 years time, 100 years time, is less jobs and more business. Black people in less jobs and more business. Less jobs, especially in the public sector. We don't want our people to be in jobs. We want them to be in business. And then the other thing I wanted to say around the self-esteem and identity thing, very important, because again, it's foundational. Who you believe you are, you then become that person. And so a lot of work needs to be done internally around personal development and that intellectual development that Paul mentioned. And I just want to mention Black authors. There's been such a wonderful and refreshing proliferation of Black authors. We're just churning out books, fiction, non-fiction, children, older people, all age groups. And that in itself, if we can get our people to read anyway, because trying to sell books, from my experience, is pretty hard work to get them to buy books, let alone read them. But if they did, from the Black authors that we're seeing, what they're writing, the way they're narrating the stories and the Black experience, whether in fiction or non-fiction, can be just so seismic in terms of the shift in mindset. So those are my points. More readers in the Black community buying Black books.
Well, thank you all. You know, we could easily, you see that last question, that I feel could be a topic for itself. You know, where do we see ourselves in 20, 30, 40, because that's really important. So the question, let me just summarize. I'm going to be very brief because I know we're over our 2 hours. Who is responsible for the destiny of the modern Black community in the UK? I am in awe to hear some of those rich comments. And I know we have to edit this, but I will just keep the entire thing. I know it'd be difficult for someone to listen to for over 2 hours, but I do hope, and I see Michelle's book is already being published, and congratulations to that.
Shamelessly plugging my book, Bouncing Back.
No,
on Amazon, guys.
And
Your mental resilience in the new normal.
Exactly. So we've heard about community groups and the idea that, you know, the community groups have really been key to the needs of our community. And I cannot stress enough their importance, whether it's in health, education, political activism. I recently went to the fantastic exhibition, War in a Babylon, and I realized how important political activism has been involved in changing the behavior of the police force, which if you grew up in the 60s and 70s that I did, you know, you look back, wow. So community groups have been critically important. The term elite is a difficult one, but it's quite clear people who have influence or power can be able to do that. And I think someone mentioned this word philanthropic, which is something maybe more in our community can do. You probably heard the story of Chadwick Boseman, the late great Chadwick Boseman who played Black Panther. He actually didn't have much funding, and he managed to get an opportunity to do some training at the Royal Academy of British Arts here in the UK. He was funded by Denzel Washington. So Denzel Washington, you may want to know, has funded loads of groups. They're only now starting to come out now, but so there's many people like Denzel in the African American community who are doing great work, funding, meeting, and doing things like that. So folks of influence, and we mentioned sort of Lewis Hamilton. Yes, government can do more, but we recognize, as Paul mentioned, about the importance of you know, us taking responsibility. And indeed, I really like the idea of faith and religion and the power that it has in our community, that it can shape. And collectively, as a community, we can come together and actually build a future. And what I loved about that last question, what you all have prescribed in terms of where do we see ourselves, it was brilliant. I've written them down because I thought they were real gems: agency, collaboration, citizens of the UK, self-love, you know, being more financially robust, professional, intellectual, investment more. So it's quite clear with just us talking, we know we actually have potentially the recipe. So it's now a case of maybe having more discussion, and really it's Joe's idea of a think tank that I think has galvanized us. The idea is, hold on, maybe this is something collective we can have, and to ask that question, you know, where do we see ourselves? I'd like to end on one note in terms of, you know, where do we see ourselves? And I want to end it, something Angela said on young people, because I'm an optimist, and I see our young people now far more vibrant. I see them have a greater sense of self-esteem, and I see them embracing their Africanism much more than when I was a kid. And the reason why I say that is not just because they all love Afrobeat, but the reason why I say they are strong in their identity. When I did a PhD, I was just doing my PhD. Now I see Black students doing PhD and doing science. And I can only reference the science, but what they are now doing, they've set up their own organizations. There's Black in Immuno, there's Black in neurobiology, there's Black in genetics. Black people are actually feeling confidence in a white space to actually say that they are Black. Mm. Which is so different than when I was at university or doing my PhD. And I think that self-confidence and self-esteem, if that continues, I see our community is going in the right direction. So can I thank Revd Joe Aldred? Can I thank Angela Clarke? Can I thank Michelle Johnson? Can I thank Dr. Dwain Neil OBE? And can I thank Paul Riddell for your foresight, for your contribution? And as always, this is Reach Society Asked Our Experts. Thank you for listening for almost 2.5 hours. I hope you found it illuminating as much as I have. Thank you.